What if the greatest act of revenge in antebellum America wasn't led by a general or a politician, but by a man considered property and a woman dismissed as mad? In the spring of 1841, in the suffocating heat of South Carolina's Low Country, a plantation owner named Silas Rutledge made an announcement so shocking it scandalized a society built on cruelty. He was transferring complete authority over his 28-year-old daughter, Catherine, every aspect of her care, her person, her life, to an enslaved man named Ezekiel. This wasn't kindness, it was a calculated humiliation, a devil's bargain. But Silas Rutledge had no idea he was handing a lit match to a powder keg of rage that had been building for decades. By that November, Catherine's body would be transformed. 13 of the county's most powerful men would be dead, and Cypress Grove Plantation would be erased from the earth, leaving behind only ash and a secret so dangerous those who knew it dared not speak. This is not just a ghost story. This is a story of justice, memory, and the terrifying price of both. Settle in. The history you're about to hear changes everything. Now, I know what you're thinking. An hour on a historical mystery? I've got dishes to do. But trust me, the dishes will still be there. This story has teeth. And by the time we're done, you'll be checking the locks on your doors and looking at the shadows in your hallway a little differently. To understand the bomb Silas Rutledge was building, you have to feel the weight of the air in Colleton County. Spring there didn't arrive with blossoms. It arrived as a solid, wet heat that clung to your skin like a second layer. The Combahee River moved slow as molasses, reflecting the funeral shroud of Spanish moss hanging from ancient oaks. And for miles, the rice fields stretched, flooded labyrinths worked by hundreds of enslaved men, women, and children, moving through knee-deep water from dawn until the mosquitoes drove them inside. This was wealth, but it was wealth built on a very specific, meticulously maintained foundation, the absolute, unchallenged power of white men over their black slaves and over their own women. The hierarchy was God, gospel, and law, and Silas Rutledge, owner of 58 enslaved people, was a devout believer. Well, devout in his ambition, at least. He was mid-tier aristocracy, wealthy enough to crave the inner circle, but perpetually just outside of it. His wife had died young. His legacy rested on one person, his daughter, Catherine. And Catherine was the problem. By 1841, she was 28, isolated, and medically tortured. Doctors, diagnosing her female hysteria, had swollen her body to over 260 pounds with tinctures of mercury and laudanum. She had violent fits. Society whispered, "Poor Silas, burdened with a mad daughter." But they were wrong. Catherine wasn't mad. She was a witness. And at age 12, she had seen something in her father's cellar that no one was ever supposed to see. What did she see? We'll get to that, because what Catherine witnessed is the dark heart of this entire story, and it connects directly to the letter that arrived on April 7th, a letter that would set this entire tragedy in motion. The letter was sealed with red wax, stamped with a scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the brethren of the harvest. The brethren, Let that name sit with you. They weren't just a social club. They were 13 of the county's most powerful men, judges, reverends, bankers, who gathered in secret to perform rituals. They blended twisted European paganism with stolen spiritual concepts from the very people they enslaved. Their core belief that power could be consumed, literally, that the blood of the weak fed the land and fed their status. Silas was a member, and the letter informed him he was $12,000 in debt to them, an impossible sum. He could sell everything and be ruined, or he could accept an alternative. He would publicly place his daughter, Catherine, under the total authority of an enslaved man, not as a nurse, as her de facto owner. He would humiliate her and himself in front of the entire county, framing it as a desperate medical treatment. In return, his debt vanished. What would you do? Would you sacrifice your child's dignity to save your own skin? Silas didn't hesitate. He wrote his acceptance by candlelight. He chose power. He always chose power. But the brethren had selected the enslaved man for him, a purchase from Virginia, Ezekiel Cross, skilled in carpentry and herbal medicine, listed as quiet and obedient. What the letter didn't say was that Ezekiel had been working his way south for 2 years, seeking the man who had sold his wife and 2 children to their deaths, for no reason other than to prove his ruthlessness to the brethren. That man was Silas Rutledge. So when Ezekiel stepped off that wagon on April 13th, he wasn't a passive tool. He was a strategist, and in his pocket was a worn piece of paper with 3 names: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his family. This wasn't an assignment, it was an opportunity, and the battlefield was the sick room of a so-called mad woman.
The first meeting between Catherine and Ezekiel was explosive. He entered her darkened, medicine-fouled room. She expected another jailer, but Ezekiel did something no one had done in 16 years. He opened the curtains. He looked at her, not at her illness, and he asked a simple, revolutionary question. What if the doctors are wrong? What if you're not sick, you're poisoned? In that moment, the dynamic shattered. Catherine, through the chemical fog, saw not a servant, but an ally, and she made her own offer. She would endure his treatments, the withdrawal, the pain, the clarity, if he would help her get revenge. I want them all dead, she said, every man who stood in that cellar. And Ezekiel? He looked at this swollen, furious woman and saw his path to Silas Rutledge. I have my own reasons, he said. A pact was sealed, not of master and slave, but of co-conspirators. As Catherine's body shed the poison, her mind became a razor. She gave Ezekiel the truth, sketches of the cellar, descriptions of the rituals, names. She had kept a coded journal for years. And she told him about the ledger, the brethren's meticulous record of every atrocity, names, dates, victims, kept in a hidden chamber to ensure every member was equally guilty. It was the key that could destroy them all. They planned to steal it during Silas's next trip, but Silas was already 2 steps ahead. He'd never gone to Charleston. He'd been waiting, watching his daughter's miracle recovery with cold suspicion. When Ezekiel and Catherine descended into the cellar on May 14th, they found the ledger. For 3 hours they copied its horrors, and then the light flooded in. Silas stood in the doorway with 6 brethren brothers. I'm impressed, he said. I didn't think you'd find the inner chamber. Trapped, outnumbered, All their planning seemed for nothing. But then Silas made his own offer to Ezekiel, an unthinkable offer.
In the candlelit cellar, surrounded by robed men, Silas laid out his terms. Ezekiel would join them, not as an equal, but as an associate. He would participate in their next ritual. He would become complicit. In return, Silas would give Ezekiel the resources to hunt down and destroy the Alabama plantation owner who had worked his family to death. He would get his revenge. All it would cost was his soul. Refuse, and both he and Catherine would die there in the cellar. Think about that choice. Join the ultimate evil to destroy a single monster, or die a principled failure. Ezekiel looked at Catherine. She shook her head. Don't become them. He looked at Silas, and he said, I accept. Catherine was shipped away, or so Silas thought. Ezekiel was held under watch for 3 weeks until the next brethren gathering, his initiation. The ritual began. A young enslaved woman was bound on the altar. A knife was placed in Ezekiel's hand. His test: make the first cut, prove his loyalty through an act of unforgivable violence. The chanting rose, the candles flickered. Ezekiel took the knife. He stepped toward the altar, and then he moved. It wasn't a cut, it was an assassination. He turned the knife on the nearest brethren member, plunged the room into darkness, and fought like a man who had already died and come back for this single purpose. But there were too many. They surrounded him. Silas smiled. You've killed yourself and Catherine both. What Silas didn't know was that Catherine had never left. For 3 weeks she had moved through the slave quarters of neighboring plantations, whispering the truth, gathering the wounded, the angry, the bereaved. And as Ezekiel fought below, Catherine led them down the cellar stairs, not with weapons of war, but with the tools of their bondage: scythes, axes, hammers. The brethren, soft men who ordered violence but never faced it, were engulfed. The revenge was brutal, total, and undeniable. In the end, Silas Rutledge, holding a knife to his own daughter's throat, begged, "Please." Catherine's reply was the final verdict of this story. "Did my wife say please?" Ezekiel asked. "Did my son?" There was no mercy. With 13 bodies at their feet and the ledger in their hands, they faced their final choice: expose the truth and be hunted, or bury it forever. They chose fire. They burned the cellar, the bodies, the ledger, though Ezekiel saved the pages naming his family. They let the world believe it was a tragic accident. Catherine Rutledge was presumed dead. Ezekiel Cross vanished from all records. The official history wrote a tidy ending, a tragic fire. But history isn't just the story told by the winners. It's the story remembered by the survivors. Whispers traveled through slave quarters for generations, a story of the night the masters burned, of a woman who refused to forget and a man who refused to forgive. In 1971, a coded journal was allegedly found during a demolition, detailing everything before it mysteriously vanished again. So, do I believe it? I believe that power built on cruelty is a fragile thing. I believe that the urge for justice is a ghost that can't be buried. And I believe that sometimes the most important chapters of history are the ones written in ash and whispered in the dark.
This tale of a mind pushed to its limits and a conspiracy hidden in plain sight resonated with you, then your next stop should be our deep dive into a modern mental prison, overthinking. We often believe our greatest battles are against external forces, but sometimes the most formidable enemy is the one inside our own heads. To learn how to break that cycle, watch our next video, Stop Overthinking, the Ancient Philosophy of Mental Freedom. It's linked right here on the end screen. Thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell for more journeys into the shadows of history. Until next time, keep wondering.